Please. He's 3. He doesn't understand any of this. Just let us go. Nate's voice cracked against the roar of JFK's terminal. Phone pressed hard to his ear. Hope's small body curled against his chest, fists twisted into his jacket. He didn't stop walking. Behind him, gate agents called boarding numbers into the fluorescent dark. But all Nate heard was Joseph's voice, low and almost gentle, which was somehow worse than shouting. You can run, Nate. Get on that plane. Fly wherever you want. A pause, the click of ice in a glass. But you'll never be safe. Not you. Not him. The line went dead. Nate stood frozen for half a second, then kept moving, because stopping was a luxury he'd given up 9 hours ago, back when he'd packed one suitcase and left everything else, his apartment, his name on the company letterhead, the ring still sitting in its box, behind. 6 months earlier, none of this had existed. He'd had a corner office with his name etched on the glass, headlines calling him Detroit's brightest new strategist, and a fiancée who used to bring him coffee before board meetings. Joseph had been charming then. Warm. It was only after the engagement that Nate learned about the debts, the kind men break kneecaps for, and the temper that came out swinging when Joseph couldn't pay them. Nate hadn't left for himself. He'd left the night he found bruises on his own wrists and realized Hope was sleeping 20 feet away. Now he had $600, a diaper bag, and one name in his phone he hadn't spoken to in 4 years, Matthew. Nathan. Matthew's voice cut through Incheon's arrivals hall the next morning, arms already open, smile blinding under the airport lights. Look at you. Look at him. He crouched to Hope's height, though she buried her face deeper into Nate's neck. I promised you a fresh start, didn't I? Marketing director titles basically already got your name on it. Nate wanted to believe him. He needed to. He didn't notice, not yet, how Matthew's eyes flicked once, briefly, to Nate's worn suitcase, assessing, calculating, before the smile returned, warm as ever. The fresh start turned out to be a navy polyester uniform folded on a break room bench 3 days later. Temporary, Matthew said, not quite meeting his eyes. Just until HR finishes processing your file. You understand how paperwork is. Nate held the uniform in both hands. Custodial Services was stitched across the pocket in small gray letters. He thought of Hope asleep in the corner of that same break room, borrowed from a coworker's pity, and he thought of $600 becoming $200, becoming nothing. Sure, Nate said. Temporary. Matthew's smile didn't waver. Something behind it did. By 2 a.m., Nate had mopped 4 floors of Wong Group's executive suite in the kind of silence that made his own footsteps sound like confessions. The building at night belonged to no one. Glass corridors reflecting a city of lights he didn't recognize, a life he no longer had a claim to. He didn't hear the elevator arrive on the 40th floor. He didn't hear the footsteps. He only felt it, the sudden certainty of being watched, and looked up to find a man standing motionless in the office doorway across the hall. Tall, dark suit, tie loosened just slightly, like he'd stayed too late fighting a battle no one else knew about. His face was unreadable in the low light, but his eyes weren't. They were fixed on Nate with an intensity that made the mop handle go still in Nate's hands. Neither of them spoke. Nate should have looked away first. Janitors did not hold eye contact with executives. But something in the man's stillness kept him rooted. Not threat, not curiosity even, but recognition, like he was looking at something he'd been trying to name for a long time. The elevator chimed behind him. The man stepped backward into it without breaking his gaze, the doors beginning their slow slide shut between them. Nate finally found his voice, some instinct screaming say something, apologize, explain. But before he could, the stranger spoke first, low enough that Nate would spend the rest of the night convinced he'd imagined it. You're not supposed to be here. The doors narrowed to a sliver of gold light. And yet, I think you're exactly who I've been looking for. The doors sealed shut. Nate stood alone in the empty hallway, heart slamming against his ribs, mop forgotten on the marble floor. If this story has you hooked already, hit subscribe now. Chapter 2 drops next, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when Nate finds out exactly who that man was. You've been staring at that door for 10 minutes, sir. He's not walking through it. James set a coffee cup on the desk without looking up from his tablet, the way he always did. Like Tae-sung's silences were just another item on the morning schedule. Tae-sung didn't answer. He rarely did before 8 a.m. The office was immaculate, glass and steel and nothing out of place, except for the single-framed photo on the corner of his desk, face down, the way it had been for 6 years. James had stopped asking about it in year 2. He'd learned that some doors, even for a man as fearless as Tae-sung Wong, stayed closed for a reason. The Quan account wants a revised deck by Thursday, James continued. And your 10 o'clock is already threatening to cancel unless you personally cancel it. You haven't even heard what they want. I don't care what they want. Tae-sung finally looked up, and even James, 5 years into this job, still felt the weight of that gaze, sharp, tired, entirely too controlled. Find out who was on the 40th floor last night. Security roster, cleaning schedule, everything. James blinked. That's oddly specific for a Tuesday. Tae-sung didn't explain. He never did. 2 floors down, Nate was learning the particular exhaustion of living 2 lives at once. Mornings belonged to Hope. Cartoons on a cracked phone screen, peanut butter toast, the fierce negotiations of getting a 3-year-old into shoes. Nights belonged to mop buckets and marble floors, and the low hum of a building that never fully slept. You look like a ghost, Eugen said, tossing him a rag as he clocked in. She was 50-something, sharp-tongued, and the only person in the building who'd noticed Hope sleeping in the break room closet without immediately reporting it. Ghosts don't get bags under their eyes this bad. What's your excuse? Daycare doesn't open till 7. My shift ends at 6. So the genius solution is smuggling a toddler into a Fortune 500 building. She's very quiet. Eugen snorted, but she'd already started rearranging the break room's spare blankets into something resembling a nest. 1 hour. If anyone asks, she's my granddaughter. 3 floors up, Matthew wasn't being nearly as generous. He doesn't need his real file in the system, Matthew muttered, hunched over HR's database, deleting line by line the degree, the awards, the 6 years of campaigns that had once made Nate's name mean something. James happened to be walking past the open door and stopped unnoticed. Custodial services doesn't need a resume. It needs a mop. You could just tell him no, James said quietly, stepping in. Instead of erasing him. Matthew startled, then laughed it off too quickly. You don't get it. He's always been the easy one, the talented one. Everyone loved Nate before he even opened his mouth. His jaw tightened. For once, I want the room to look at me first. James said nothing, but something in his expression shifted, quiet and careful, filing the moment away. That night, Nate couldn't sleep even after his shift ended. Hope was curled against him on the break room cot, and his mind kept circling back to the argument he'd overheard in the boardroom hours earlier. Executives fighting over a luxury sedan campaign that wasn't landing, numbers sliding, nobody willing to say the concept itself was broken. He shouldn't have cared. He wasn't paid to care. But his hand found a legal pad anyway, and by 3 a.m., 3 pages were filled with a new tagline, a repositioning angle, a campaign built around trust instead of luxury. The kind of idea that used to win him industry awards. It felt good, terrifyingly good, like breathing after months underwater. He left it on the boardroom table without thinking, already halfway out the door to catch 4 hours of sleep before Hope woke up. He didn't remember, until he was halfway home, that he'd signed it. Out of habit, the way he'd signed 1,000 decks before this one. Nate. Just his name small in the corner. The next morning, Tae-sung sat alone in the boardroom long after the meeting ended, 3 handwritten pages spread across the table. He read them once. Then again, slower. His hands went still. James. His voice was different now, quiet, edged with something that hadn't been there in years. James appeared in the doorway within seconds. Sir? Tae-sung held up the notepad, one name circled in his own pen. Find out who wrote this. He stood, jaw tight, eyes dark with a hunger for answers he hadn't felt in a long time. Tonight. I don't care what it takes. Across the city, Nate was folding laundry with Hope humming beside him, utterly unaware that the single worst mistake of his double life was already sitting on a CEO's desk, with his name circled in red. Pull up the 40th floor again. 2 nights ago. 2 a.m. Tae-sung stood behind his desk, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the monitor as James cycled through the security feed. The footage flickered, grainy and blue-tinted, until a familiar figure appeared, mop in hand, head down, moving through the empty hallway like he belonged to the shadows more than the light. Tae-sung's jaw tightened. He leaned closer without meaning to. That's him, he said quietly. That's the one who was standing there. The elevator. James glanced between the screen and his boss's face, something clicking into place that he chose not to say out loud yet. Custodial roster says his name's Nate. No last name in the system. Odd. Odd, Tae-sung repeated, and didn't elaborate. 3 floors down, Nate had already spent the entire morning in quiet panic, replaying the moment he'd walked away from the boardroom table 3 nights ago. Notepad in hand. No, not in hand. Left behind. Forgotten. Signed. He slipped back into the executive floor under the guise of restocking supplies, heart hammering, eyes scanning the table where he'd left it. Gone. Of course it was gone. He pressed a hand to his face, willing himself not to spiral, when a small, familiar cry cut through the hallway. Hope. He'd left her for 3 minutes. 3, he'd counted them, settled with a coloring book in the break room while he checked the boardroom. 3 minutes was apparently long enough for a 3-year-old to wander. He found her outside a supply closet, tear-streaked and hiccuping, and crouched in front of her was the very last person Nate expected to see on his knees on an office floor. Tae-sung Wong, tie loosened, sleeves pushed up, holding a tissue out to her with the stiff, uncertain patience of a man who had clearly never done this before. Your. Tae-sung looked up, startled, some careful mask slipping for half a second. She's yours. I'm so sorry, she wasn't supposed to. Nate scooped Hope up, whose crying immediately quieted into hiccups against his shoulder. She's not supposed to be here at all. Please don't report this. I'll take her home, I wasn't going to report her. Tae-sung stood, brushing off his knees, something almost amused tugging at his mouth. She has strong opinions about crayon colors. She informed me purple was wrong for at least 2 minutes. Despite everything, Nate huffed something close to a laugh. It surprised them both. They stood there a beat too long, the hallway quiet except for Hope's settling breath. Tae-sung's eyes moved over Nate's face like he was trying to solve something, patient and unreadable. You work nights, Tae-sung said. Not quite a question. Cleaning crew. Sir. The word felt strange in his mouth, formal in a way that didn't match how Tae-sung was looking at him. You don't have to call me that. You're kind of my boss's boss. Still. A pause, something quieter beneath it. Doesn't mean I want the distance. Nate didn't know what to do with that, so he said nothing, and Tae-sung didn't push, though his eyes lingered a moment too long on Hope's small hand fisted in Nate's collar. Like he was looking at something that ached and healed him at the same time, and wasn't ready to explain why. From the far end of the hallway, Matthew watched the entire exchange with his stomach in knots. Tae-sung Wong did not crouch on floors. Tae-sung Wong did not linger in hallways making janitors laugh. Something was unraveling, thread by thread, and Matthew could feel his carefully buried lie starting to fray at the edges. He's just a cleaner, Matthew muttered to himself once he was alone, jaw tight. That's all he needs to stay. Nate said a quick goodbye and turned to carry Hope back down the corridor, relief loosening his shoulders for the first time all day. He'd survived it. Barely. Tae-sung hadn't asked questions he couldn't answer. Nate. He froze. He hadn't given his name. He turned slowly. Tae-sung stood exactly where he'd left him, one hand raised. Holding the missing notepad, 3 pages of handwritten strategy catching the light, his name circled in the corner in someone else's red ink. Your handwriting, Tae-sung said, voice low, unreadable, eyes never leaving Nate's face. It's very distinct. Nate's blood ran cold, every excuse dying in his throat at once. Tae-sung didn't smile. He didn't accuse. He simply watched him, patient and quiet, like a man deciding exactly how much of the truth he already held, and how long he intended to let Nate keep pretending otherwise. Unknown number. Again. Nate stared at the phone buzzing in his palm, thumb hovering over the screen, dread pooling cold in his stomach before he even answered. He knew that rhythm of silence on the other end. He'd know it anywhere. Nate. Joseph's voice was calm, almost gentle, which was always the most dangerous version of him. Found a nice little daycare on Yeoksamdong. Pretty building. Big windows. A pause, deliberate, cruel. Good visibility from the street. The photo came through a second later. Hope's daycare, taken from across the road, time-stamped that morning. Nate's hand shook so hard he nearly dropped the phone. Detroit, 11 months earlier. You're not taking her anywhere. Joseph's voice had filled the apartment like smoke, thick and suffocating. Nate remembered the exact angle of the lamp knocked sideways, the exact sound of Hope crying in the next room, the exact moment he stopped weighing his career, his name, his entire carefully built life against one single fact. If he stayed one more night, he might not get another chance to leave. He'd grabbed a bag with shaking hands while Joseph screamed threats through a locked bathroom door, and he hadn't looked back once. He looked back now, though. Every day. Joseph had found a way to reach across an ocean without lifting a finger. Nate didn't clock in that night. He stood outside the building entrance for 10 minutes, seriously considering packing the one suitcase he'd never fully unpacked and disappearing again. Another city, another name, another version of running that never actually outran anything. "You look like you're about to bolt," Eugen said, appearing beside him with 2 coffees, handing one over without asking. "Maybe I should." "Maybe." She studied him, no pity in her eyes, only steel. "Or maybe you drag a 3-year-old through another airport at midnight because her father's tired of standing still. She needs a bed, Nate. A school. A person who doesn't disappear every time it gets hard." She softened, just slightly. "You've built something here. Small, ugly, held together with tape, but something. Don't burn it down because you're scared." Nate didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. That was answer enough. He clocked in an hour late. Eugen didn't mention it to anyone. At 9 p.m., a message from HR summoned him to a private conference room. Not the executive floor, not a public hallway, but somewhere quiet, deliberate. Tae-sung was already seated when Nate walked in, notepad from 3 nights ago resting closed on the table between them. "Sit," Tae-sung said. Not a command, an invitation, gentler than Nate expected. Nate stayed standing. "If this is about the notes, I'll pay for the paper, I know you wrote it." The room went silent. Nate's pulse roared in his ears. "I'm not going to ask why you're hiding," Tae-sung continued, voice low, steady, eyes never leaving his. "I'm not going to ask why a man with handwriting like that is mopping floors at 2 in the morning." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm going to ask what you need." Nate's throat tightened. No one had asked him that in almost a year. Not his brother, who'd handed him a mop instead of a title. Not Joseph, who'd only ever asked what Nate could give him. Just, "What do you need?" "I need," his voice cracked, and he hated how exposed it left him. "I need this job. That's all. Please don't take it from me." Tae-sung studied him a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Not pity, something closer to recognition, like he saw exactly how thin the ground beneath Nate was and had decided, quietly, not to be the one who cracked it further. "No one's taking anything from you," he said finally. "Go home. It's late." Nate left the building in a daze, equal parts grateful and terrified. Terrified of being seen, of being known, of a man with that much power choosing mercy instead of exposure for reasons Nate didn't understand and wasn't sure he could survive wanting to understand. He was still turning the conversation over in his mind when he reached his apartment door and stopped cold. It was open. Just an inch, wind sliding through the gap, curtains inside billowing like something disturbed. And there, abandoned in the hallway outside, small and worn and unmistakably hers. Hope's stuffed rabbit, lying face down on the concrete. "Hope!" Nate's voice tore through the empty hallway, and no one answered. Nate's worst fear is standing right in front of him. Subscribe now so you're there the moment Chapter 5 reveals what's behind that door. "Hope! Hope, answer me, please." Nate's scream tore through the hallway, raw and animal, doors cracking open along the corridor as neighbors spilled out in robes and slippers. He shoved through the apartment, knocking over a lamp, checking the closet, the bathroom, under the bed, Hope's name breaking apart in his throat with every empty room. "Nate! Nate, stop, she's fine, she's with me." Eugen's voice cut through the chaos from the stairwell. Hope perched on her hip, sleepy and confused but very much unharmed. "My phone died, I couldn't call. I picked her up early. Wanted to surprise you with dinner. I let myself in with the spare key, the wind must have." Nate didn't hear the rest. He crossed the hallway in 3 strides and pulled Hope into his arms so tightly she squirmed, pressing his face into her hair, his whole body shaking with the aftershock of terror that hadn't caught up to the relief yet. "I'm sorry," Eugen said quietly, watching him. "I didn't think." "It's okay." His voice didn't sound okay. "It's okay." 2 floors below, in a car James had insisted on, Tae-sung was already moving before he fully understood why. A security alert. A commotion at Nate's address. He hadn't told James to explain further. He was already out the door. He found Nate sitting on the stairwell steps outside the apartment 20 minutes later. Hope finally asleep against his shoulder, neighbors dispersed, adrenaline burned down to ash. Nate looked up, startled to see him there, out of a suit for once, sleeves pushed up, no title between them. "You didn't have to come," Nate said. "I know." Tae-sung sat down beside him anyway, careful not to crowd him. "I wanted to." They sat in silence a while, the building settling back into its ordinary night sounds. Nate finally spoke, voice hollow with exhaustion, the kind that strips away every wall a person's built. "Her name isn't Hope because it's pretty," he said. It's because that's what I had left. That's all I had. He swallowed hard. I left someone. Back in Detroit. He wasn't. He stopped being someone I recognized. Debts, then threats, then it wasn't threats anymore. His hands tightened slightly. I ran because staying meant I might not get another chance to. Tae-sung didn't flinch, didn't press, didn't offer the kind of hollow sympathy Nate had learned to brace against. He just listened, steady and quiet, like Nate's words were something worth holding carefully. That's why the name, Nate finished. Nathan didn't survive that apartment. Nate did. Tae-sung was quiet a long moment before he spoke, voice lower now, rougher at the edges. I had a brother. Younger. 6 years old when. He stopped, started again. I was supposed to be watching him. At the lake house. I looked away for 90 seconds. His jaw tightened. 90 seconds is a very long time when you spend every year after counting them. Nate turned to look at him fully now, something in his chest aching in a way that had nothing to do with fear. That's why the photo. Face down. Tae-sung's eyes flicked to him, surprised he knew. James mentioned it. No, Nate said softly. I just noticed. I clean your office, remember? Something shifted between them, unguarded, aching, honest in a way neither of them had allowed with anyone in years. Tae-sung's hand moved slightly closer on the step between them, not quite touching, and Nate didn't pull away. Hope has his laugh, Tae-sung said quietly, nodding toward the sleeping child. I don't know why I noticed that. I just did. Maybe you were supposed to. Neither of them moved for a long moment, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. Two people who had spent years building walls suddenly finding a single crack they didn't want to close. Eventually Tae-sung stood, brushing off his slacks, some careful mask sliding back into place. Not distance exactly, just protection, the kind Nate understood better than most. Get some sleep, Tae-sung said. Both of you. Nate watched him walk toward the car, something warm and terrifying blooming in his chest that he didn't have a name for yet. Tae-sung's phone buzzed before he reached the door. James. An attached photo, security footage time-stamped less than 3 hours earlier, grainy, low angle, but unmistakable. A man loitering across the street from Nate's building, watching the entrance, watching the window where Hope's nightlight glowed. Tae-sung stopped walking. His jaw went tight, eyes cold in a way James had only seen once before years ago. He looked back at the apartment window, then down at the photo again. He's already here, Tae-sung said quietly, to no one, fury settling into something colder and far more dangerous than anger. Effective immediately, Nate is being transferred to corporate strategy. Tae-sung's voice carried flat and final across the boardroom, and for a moment nobody moved. Matthew's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. The rest of the executive team exchanged glances, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Sir, with respect, one director started. He's custodial staff. He's the author of this. Tae-sung set the handwritten notepad on the table, sliding it down the length so every set of eyes could see the pages, the strategy, the names circled in the corner. This concept alone will save the luxury line's Q3 numbers. I'd like someone to explain to me why a marketing graduate with this kind of instinct was mopping floors instead of sitting at this table. Silence. Then Matthew, too quickly. There must be some mix-up in HR. There was. Tae-sung's gaze didn't waver. His degree. His portfolio. Both scrubbed from the system 3 weeks ago, right around the time he started here. He turned slow and deliberate. You want to explain that, Matthew? Matthew's face drained of color. Beside him, James, who had spent the last week quietly pulling access logs, quietly hoping he was wrong, looked at his boyfriend with something that had curdled past disappointment into something closer to grief. You erased your own brother, James said, quiet enough that only Matthew heard it, but it landed like a shout. It's not, Matthew's voice cracked. You don't understand what it's like standing next to him. Everyone always. Enough. Tae-sung's voice cut through the room, cold and absolute. We'll discuss consequences privately. This meeting is about Nate's transfer. That's not up for debate. The room emptied slowly, executives murmuring, Matthew storming out first, humiliation radiating off him like heat. Nate found Tae-sung alone afterward in his office, pulse still hammering. You can't do this, he said, the moment the door shut behind him. I already did. Tae-sung, please. His voice shook, fear breaking through gratitude. Visibility means people ask questions. Questions mean records. Records mean he finds me faster than he already has. His hands curled into fists at his sides. I need to stay small. I need to stay invisible. That's how I've kept her safe. Tae-sung crossed the room, stopping close enough that Nate had to tilt his head up to meet his eyes. I'm not just protecting my company's best asset, he said, voice low, steady, certain in a way that stole the argument right out of Nate's mouth. I'm protecting you. The air between them went taut, charged, the space that had been slowly narrowing over the last 5 chapters finally collapsing to almost nothing. Nate's breath caught. Tae-sung's hand rose, slow, deliberate, brushing along his jaw like he'd been waiting years for permission he hadn't asked for yet. Nate! The door burst open. Daddy, she took my crayon. Hope stormed in mid-tantrum, Yujin trailing behind with an apologetic wince, and the moment shattered into something warmer, softer, both men jerking back with matching flustered breaths that dissolved almost immediately into laughter, real, unguarded laughter, the kind neither of them had allowed themselves in longer than they could say. She's very passionate about crayons, Tae-sung said, crouching to Hope's level, voice gentler than the boardroom had ever heard. She gets that from her father, Yujin muttered, and Nate shot her a look that only made her grin wider. For a moment, just a moment, it felt like something whole. Something built instead of broken. It didn't last. That night, long after the office emptied, Matthew sat alone in his car in the parking garage, humiliation curdled into something sharper, more dangerous. His career, his standing, the one thing he'd built his entire identity around, gone in a single boardroom because of the brother he'd spent years trying to bury. He scrolled through his phone with shaking hands until he found the number Nate didn't know he still had. A number from 6 months ago, when a stranger had called looking for information, and Matthew, furious, unthinking, had listened just long enough to remember it. He pressed call. It rang twice. I know where your ex-fiancé's kid is, Matthew said, voice low, trembling with something between grief and rage. If you want back in, this is how. The screen glowed in the dark garage, the contact name clear and damning. Joseph, you approved the entire campaign without a single revision? Nate stared at the email, disbelief written across his face as he turned his laptop toward Yujin, who'd taken to visiting his new desk on her breaks just to see him sitting somewhere with a window. Don't sound so shocked, she said. You're good at this. You were always going to be good at this. For the first time in almost a year, Nate let himself believe it. 2 weeks into corporate strategy, and the numbers didn't lie. The campaign was already outperforming projections, executives who used to walk past him in the hallway now stopping to ask his opinion in meetings. It should have felt like enough. He didn't know, not yet, what his brother had done in a parking garage 3 nights ago. The audience did. Nate didn't. And that gap, between what he believed was finally safe and what was already unraveling, sat heavy over every quiet, hopeful moment that followed. Pack a bag for her, Tae-sung said Friday evening, appearing at Nate's desk with a rare, almost boyish uncertainty. Not a big one. Just dinner. The 3 of us. Is this a business dinner? No. Is this a date? Tae-sung's jaw tightened slightly, the closest thing to nervousness Nate had ever seen on him. I don't know what to call it. I just know I don't want to keep pretending I don't want it. It wasn't fancy. That was the point. A small restaurant with sticky booth seats and a kid's menu. Hope smearing ketchup across her face while Tae-sung, sleeves rolled, patiently rebuilt her collapsing tower of fries for the 4th time. Nate watched them both, something unguarded and warm blooming in his chest, dangerous in how easy it felt. By the time they reached the car, Hope was asleep before her seatbelt clicked, and somewhere on the quiet drive back, she'd shifted, small fist curling into the front of Tae-sung's shirt from the back seat. He didn't move her. He didn't ask Nate to. She has his stubbornness, Tae-sung said quietly, eyes on the road, voice rougher than usual. The way she refuses to let go of things. He used to fall asleep like that too. Fist closed around whatever he could reach. Nate turned to look at him. You don't have to talk about him if it hurts. It doesn't. Not the way it used to. Tae-sung's hands tightened slightly on the wheel, like he was surprised by his own words. For 6 years, every memory of him felt like an accusation. Like I didn't deserve to remember him gently. He glanced back at Hope in the mirror. She doesn't accuse me of anything. She just reaches for me. Like it's simple. His voice dropped. I forgot it could be simple. Nate reached over without thinking, resting his hand over Tae-sung's on the console. Neither of them pulled away. Maybe it can be, Nate said softly. For both of us. The moment held, warm and fragile, the kind neither of them wanted to examine too closely for fear of breaking it. Nate almost let himself believe the worst was behind them. He should have known better. Monday afternoon, Nate left work early for the first time in weeks, eager to surprise Hope at pickup instead of sending Eugen. He walked into her daycare with a small bouquet of flowers for her teacher, and a smile he hadn't worn easily in months. The smile died instantly. "Oh, her father already picked her up early," the teacher said, glancing up from her clipboard, entirely unbothered. "Said something about a doctor's appointment. Sweet man, very polite." Nate's blood went cold. "I haven't left work all day," he said slowly, voice thinning. "I've been here 20 minutes. I am her father." The teacher's smile faltered, confusion sliding into alarm as she checked the sign-out sheet, finger tracing a signature that wasn't his, a name scrawled just legibly enough to pass. "That wasn't me," Nate said, the words barely making it out, the world tilting sideways beneath him. "That wasn't me. Where is she? Where's my daughter? Pull every camera within 3 blocks. Now!" Tae-sung's voice was ice, cutting through the chaos of the daycare office as Nate paced, hands shaking too hard to hold his own phone. James was already on his laptop, patched into the building's security feed, when the footage resolved into something unmistakable. A man in a delivery uniform, cap low, walking Hope out the side entrance by the hand, calm as anything, like he had every right in the world. "That's him." Nate's voice cracked entirely. "That's Joseph. He used a fake badge," the daycare director said, ashen. "It looked legitimate, I swear. I checked the... Where's the van headed?" Tae-sung cut in, already moving, already dialing. "James, pull traffic cameras east of the building. Call our security contact at the police liaison office. Tell them this is priority 1. Tell them." He stopped, glancing at Nate, whose knees had nearly given out against the wall. "Tell them a child's life is at risk. That's all they need to hear. This is my fault." Nate's voice was barely audible, hollowed out. "I thought Seoul was far enough. I thought, God, I let myself believe we were safe." "Nate." Tae-sung gripped his shoulders, forcing eye contact, voice low and fierce. "Look at me. This is not your fault. We are going to find her." Across the city, Matthew sat frozen at his desk when Nate burst through the door 20 minutes later, face wrecked, fury radiating off him in waves. "Did you do this?" Nate's voice shook, low and dangerous in a way Matthew had never heard from him. "Someone gave him information. Someone knew things only family would know. Did you do this?" Matthew's silence lasted 3 seconds too long. "I didn't think he'd actually," Matthew's voice broke. "I was angry. About the promotion, about everything. I called him. I told him where you were. I didn't think. You didn't think." Nate's laugh was broken, disbelieving. "You erased my name from this company. You buried everything I built. And then you handed my daughter to the man who used to leave bruises on my wrists." His voice cracked entirely. "She's 3 years old, Matthew." "Nate, I'm sorry, Get out of my sight." Nate's voice shattered on the last word, grief and rage tangled together into something raw and unbearable. "I don't have a brother anymore." Matthew didn't argue. He simply sat there, wrecked, watching Nate walk away, the full weight of what he'd done finally, permanently, too late landing. Back in the car, Tae-sung was already on the phone with his private security team, voice clipped and commanding in a way that left no room for delay. "I want eyes on every exit route from that district within the hour," he said. "And get the car ready. I'm going myself." "Sir, protocol says we wait for police coordination." "I don't care about protocol." Tae-sung's voice was granite. "That is not happening to him again. Not on my watch." Nate climbed into the passenger seat, hollow-eyed, hands still trembling. "You don't have to do this. This isn't your fight." Tae-sung turned to him, something fierce and unwavering settling into his expression. "You stopped being someone else's problem the moment I decided I wasn't letting you carry this alone." His hand found Nate's, steadying certain. "She's not just your daughter anymore, Nate. Not to me." Nate had no words for that. He didn't need any. He held on, and Tae-sung drove. They were 3 minutes from the last known location when Nate's phone rang, unknown number, and the entire car went silent. He answered with shaking hands, putting it on speaker before he could think better of it. "Nate." Joseph's voice slid through the speaker, calm, almost pleasant, which made it so much worse. "She's a sweet girl. Doesn't cry much. Wonder where she gets that from. Where is she?" Nate's voice was barely holding together. "Joseph, if you touch her." "You want her back?" Joseph's tone didn't change at all. "Come alone. Come now." A pause, deliberate, cruel. "And Nate, bring the ring I gave you. I want to see it one last time." The line went dead. Nate stared at the phone, breath ragged, the silence in the car deafening. Beside him, Tae-sung's hands tightened white-knuckled on the wheel, jaw set like stone, already turning the car toward whatever came next. No hesitation, no fear, only the terrifying, unshakable certainty of a man who had already decided he wasn't losing either of them. Joseph. Nate's voice didn't shake this time. He stepped into the abandoned lot alone, streetlights flickering over rusted shipping containers, exactly as instructed. No police cars, no sirens, nothing but the cold night air and the man standing in the shadows with hope asleep against his shoulder. You came. Joseph smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, which were bloodshot, manic, a man who'd burned through every safety net he'd ever had. Where's the ring? I don't have it. Nate's voice stayed level. I never kept it, Joseph. I left everything behind that night, including you. That's not the answer I wanted. Joseph's grip tightened slightly on hope, and Nate's whole body went rigid, every instinct screaming to close the distance and rip her away, but he forced himself still. Look at me. Nate took one careful step forward, hands raised, voice steady in a way it had never been back in Detroit. You want to hurt someone? Hurt me. I'm right here. She's 3 years old, Joseph. She doesn't even know your name. She could. Something desperate cracked through Joseph's calm. We could have been a family. You took that from me. You took it from yourself. Nate's voice hardened, something unbreakable settling into his spine. Not the man who used to flinch at raised voices, but someone rebuilt, piece by every hard month since. I'm not scared of you anymore. Joseph's jaw clenched, unstable, unpredictable, his free hand curling into a fist. Let her go. Tae-sung's voice cut through the dark, calm and lethal, stepping out from the shadows where he'd trailed silently behind Nate the entire way, refusing, as promised, to let him face this alone. Joseph's eyes darted between them, cornered, panicked. Who the hell is? Security is already on their way, Tae-sung said, voice like iron. Every exit from this lot is covered. You have exactly one choice that doesn't end with you in a cell for the next decade, and it's putting that child down. Right now. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Joseph lunged, not toward Hope, but toward Nate, rage overtaking whatever remained of his composure, and the world blurred into motion. Tae-sung was faster, closing the distance in 2 strides, wrenching Joseph's arm back and pinning him against the container wall with a controlled, brutal efficiency that left no room for argument. Nate surged forward the second Hope was clear, scooping her into his arms, her small cry of confusion breaking into relief the moment she recognized him. Daddy, I've got you. Nate's voice broke completely now, clutching her against his chest, every ounce of fear finally collapsing into overwhelming, shaking relief. I've got you, baby, I've got you. Security arrived minutes later, police close behind, Joseph restrained and shouting threats that meant nothing anymore. Not against Tae-sung Wang's legal team, not against the restraining order and international charges already being filed before the car doors even shut. It was over. Nate sat in the back of Tae-sung's car 20 minutes later, hope finally asleep against his chest, adrenaline slowly bleeding out of his limbs and leaving him hollow, shaking, wrung out. Tae-sung sat beside him, close, quiet, his hand finding Nate's in the space between them. You were incredible tonight, Tae-sung said softly. I was terrified. You didn't look it. His thumb brushed gently over Nate's knuckles. You looked like a man who wasn't leaving without his daughter. That's not the same as fearless. It's braver. Nate looked up at him, exhaustion and something warmer tangled together in his expression. You followed me. You weren't supposed to be there. I was never going to let you do that alone. Tae-sung's voice dropped, rougher now, something finally breaking loose after weeks of careful restraint. I don't just want to protect you, Nate. I want to build something with you. Both of you. His hand rose, tracing gently along Nate's jaw, the way he'd almost dared to once before. A home. A life. Whatever that looks like. Nate's breath caught, every wall he'd spent a year rebuilding finally, completely undone. Then build it with me, he whispered. Tae-sung closed the distance slowly, giving Nate every chance to pull away, and when he didn't, their lips finally met, soft, aching, everything they'd been circling for weeks finally settling into something real, hope sleeping undisturbed between them. Nate's phone buzzed against his leg, breaking the moment. He pulled back reluctantly, glancing at the screen, and went still. That's... His brow furrowed, confusion cutting through the warmth still lingering on his lips. That's my old law firm. From Detroit. His stomach twisted. Why would they be calling now? Mr. Chin, slow down. What do you mean the debts were never mine? Nate gripped the phone, pacing his new office, Tae-sung watching from the doorway with quiet, careful patience. Joseph's arrest triggered a full financial review, the lawyer explained. Turns out he'd been forging your signature on loan documents for over a year. Every debt collector who came looking for you, they should have been looking for him. We're filing to clear your name completely. All of it, Nate. It's over. Nate sat down slowly, the phone nearly slipping from his hand. A year of looking over his shoulder, of flinching at blocked numbers, of believing some invisible debt still chained him to Detroit, gone in a single phone call. Thank you, he whispered, and hung up staring at nothing, until Tae-sung crossed the room and knelt in front of him. You're free, Tae-sung said softly. Really free. Nate let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a year. I don't know what that feels like yet. Then we'll figure it out together. Matthew's reckoning came quieter, without an audience. Demoted 3 levels, stripped of his team, his name quietly removed from the executive floor directory. Professional disgrace complete and irreversible. He found Nate alone in the break room days later, the same one where Hope used to nap in secret. I don't expect forgiveness, Matthew said, voice hoarse. I just needed to say it to your face. I'm sorry, Nate. For all of it. The degree, the job, the call. His hands trembled. I spent so long resenting you for being effortless at everything that I never stopped to see how hard you were actually fighting. I'm sorry I made it harder. Nate studied him a long moment. The brother who'd buried him, and beneath that still somewhere the boy he used to know. I'm not ready to call you family again, he said honestly. But I don't hate you anymore. That's something. Matthew nodded, eyes wet, and it wasn't resolution, not fully, but it was a door left open instead of slammed shut. James watched all of it from a careful distance, still standing beside Matthew through the fallout, though something between them had shifted permanently. Trust cracked, being rebuilt slower now, one honest conversation at a time. Neither of them knew yet if it would hold. But neither of them walked away either. The weeks that followed moved like a held breath finally released. Nate's campaigns kept succeeding, his name back on his own work for the first time in a year, executives seeking him out instead of overlooking him. Hope started at a real preschool, no more hidden naps in break rooms, no more locked doors between her and stability. Eugen still showed up twice a week with unsolicited opinions and a bag of snacks Hope had declared the good kind. You're glowing, Eugen told Nate one afternoon, watching him laugh at something on his phone. A photo Tae-sung had sent from a work trip, Hope's drawing taped proudly to his hotel mirror. Disgusting. I liked you better haunted. No, you didn't. No, she admitted, smiling. I didn't. The rooftop was Tae-sung's idea. Quiet, private, the whole city glowing gold beneath a setting sun. Hope sat between them at a small table, coloring with a determined focus that made Tae-sung smile every time he glanced over. I have something for you, Tae-sung said, sliding a small box across the table. Nate opened it slowly, expecting he didn't know what, and found instead a single key resting on velvet. It's not a ring, Tae-sung said, something vulnerable breaking through his usual composure. Not yet. I didn't want to rush you or her. He nodded toward Hope, then met Nate's eyes fully. It's to our place. All 3 of our names are on the lease. Nate's throat tightened, eyes burning. Tae-sung. No more hiding, Tae-sung said softly. No more running. Just home. If you want it. I want it. Nate's voice broke on the words, warm and certain. I want it more than anything. They embraced, Hope wedging herself between them with a delighted giggle. And for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, nothing ached. Nothing was borrowed or temporary or one bad phone call away from collapsing. Later that night, alone in his office, Tae-sung reached for the framed photo that had sat face down on his desk for 6 years. He turned it over slowly, setting it upright beside a new photo. Nate and Hope, laughing on the rooftop, gold light catching them both. Some men search their whole lives for home. Tae-sung Wang finally found his, hiding in a janitor's closet all along. Thank you for watching this story until the very end. If you loved Nate and Tae-sung's journey, let us know in the comments. Part 2 might be coming soon.